Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon for those on the East Coast. This is Preston Clark. I'm the president here at EverFi. I begged and pleaded to let Michele Kalu, who moderates our webinars, uncharacteristically allow me to kick this event off today. And I just wanted to take about 90 seconds to give some context and perspective on why this topic is so near and dear to us at EverFi and me as well. And so thank you, Michele, for letting me have this minute. As for the last couple of days, we've been watching the organizations that have been signing up for this webinar. We had over 600 companies of various sizes, from Fortune 500 companies to small businesses, from general counsels to heads of HR to CEOs and presidents. And we know that diversity and inclusion is a topic, an issue that has been top of mind for many of us for a number of years, and now quite suddenly, more than ever perhaps, it's headline news for some of the largest organizations in the world as well. And so I wanted to thank you all for taking the time to join us. The reason why we thought this was such a timely webinar and topic for us to be diving into is for a couple of reasons I'd like to share with you. One is, you may not know that much about EverFi. We're an education technology company, but unlike many, our focus and mission is on some of the most intractable issues facing organizations, and it's organizations of all types, from global organizations that are focusing on ethics and diversity and harassment and topics that are complex to large organizations, all the way down to financial literacy in high schools and sexual violence in higher ed. We train millions of people every year, and as we grow and as we expand, we try to focus and identify new topics that are intractable by nature, that are difficult for organizations to deal with. And so the two presenters today, who I'm very excited who carved out an hour for us, Carmen Poole and Douglas Kelly, have been spending the better part of a year building out an educational program here at EverFi focused on diversity and inclusion. And certainly, as they will contextualize, education is but one small element of a great diversity program, but nevertheless, because they've been focused so heavily on researching and looking at case studies and understanding what it means for complex organizations to address topics like diversity and inclusion, and that we're going to be launching this program in a few weeks, we thought it would be timely and top of mind for them to spend some time with us today. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Michele to let him run and moderate this, but just would like to show my gratitude to both Carmen and Douglas for setting aside some time, and I think it'll be very worthwhile for all of us to engage in this conversation. So with that, Michele, stage is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Preston. Thanks so much for introducing the topic and giving a little context around why we chose this topic, and our presenters will definitely dive into the details. So just briefly, I'm a demand generation manager here at EverFi, and among other things, as Preston mentioned, I'm responsible for organizing our corporate compliance webinars. So chances are that if you're on this call today, you received an invite from me. Therefore, I just wanted to take a second to welcome you to the webinar and to thank you for heeding my call. Also, I wanted to mention, and we got a lot of ground to cover here today, so I'll take the least time possible from our presenters' pieces. A few housekeeping items before we start. If you'd like to ask questions, question box is on the right-hand side of your screen. Please just type in all the questions as they come up while we go through this. Everything will be logged and recorded. We will review them closely. If we can get back to them at the end of the presentation, in the interest of time, we will. Or if they're not suited to be answered on a mass audience basis, then either way, we'll get back to you and we'll answer them even on an individual basis. That's what we do on all our webinars. The most frequently asked question that we get is if the slides and the recording are going to be available. So I'm just going to say it right now. Yes, they will be sent to you in a follow-up email, so no need to worry about that. And lastly, when you log out of this event, right at the end, a short poll will initiate. This is the way we collect your feedback on this very event. And so we do value your feedback greatly, and it's inspiring the way that we choose topics and we keep improving and designing our webinars. So please, if you have 2-3 minutes, it doesn't take more, to just fill it in and let us know what you thought. We will review your answers very closely and then take them in great account for future planning. So after the housekeeping items have lapsed, I would just want to give a little background on our presenters today. So Carmen Poole is lead instructional writer here at EverFi. She's a former humanities scholar, researcher, and educator, and today works with the content team to design and develop our curriculum of courses. She earned her PhD in social justice education from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, and is certified in adult learning and staff training. Also joining us today is Douglas Kelly. You can see Preston just started us off, and Carmen and Douglas are up there on your screen right now. Douglas is our head of legal editorial. He is a California attorney with experience in litigating employment and labor law disputes, both before state and federal courts. Douglas is particularly passionate about organizational culture, ethical decision-making, and anti-corruption. He has a focus, obviously, always on the corporate compliance side of things. And these are also all topics that he writes regularly on our blog.lawroom.com, which we obviously encourage you to check out. And now, I think we have a brief slide on the agenda for today so that you know what's coming. So we're going to go deep in diversity insights. Then we're going to draw ethical parallels to stay loyal to the title of this webinar, which is, in fact, the intersection between diversity and ethics. And lastly, we will provide you with the takeaways of what our presentation underscores. And with that, I think it's your turn, Carmen.
Okay, thank you, Michele, and good morning, everyone. I thought I'd begin with some diversity news. I think the recent Atlassian survey on diversity in tech is a great place to start because it provides a useful entry point into a discussion about where we might be missing the mark when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So what does the Atlassian survey tell us about the status of D&I, or diversity and inclusion? In their recently released survey of 1,400 tech workers across the United States, the Atlassian survey found that 83% of tech workers believe that diversity in tech is important, but only half of those surveyed felt improvements were needed in their own workplaces. And while we know that the diversity numbers in tech have remained pretty stagnant, 94% of respondents, quote, gave the tech industry, their companies, and their teams a passing grade for diversity. The March 22nd Fortune article about this survey suggested that the disconnect between the reality of diversity and inclusion in tech and the perception of diversity and inclusion in tech is a reflection of low expectations for inclusion among tech firms. There's a good chance that it's a reflection of something a bit more than lowered expectations, however. I want to read a quote from one of the survey respondents. It's worth reading in its entirety because it takes us beyond a critique of low expectations and brings us into serious questions about our organizational and ethical cultures in the diversity and inclusion space, which is one of the key issues we wanted to address today. And I quote, "Although the tech industry as a whole does a great deal to promote diversity and inclusion, my publicly traded company says it does for appearance and legal reasons, but clearly does not. Anyone who has worked there over a year can openly see the lack of diversity and the extreme lack of inclusion among employees. Appearance is everything. They want to appear as though they are doing all they can with minimal effort in reality." What the Atlassian survey tells us is that our realities are flawed, but our perceptions are equally as flawed. In an industry that is 2% Black, 3% Latino or Latina, and 24% female, it would seem that the majority of people who participated in the survey were not themselves subject to the barriers of access related to diversity and inclusion outreach efforts or internal inclusion initiatives in a way that would allow them to validate their success, failure, or effectiveness. In certain instances, they may have actually benefited from their absence. We need to question how an industry suffering from a lack of diversity and a lack of real commitment to diversity would be expected to evaluate it in a way that does not reflect its default position of relative advantage. Some respondents gave their companies points for effort, regardless of any measured effectiveness. Others said that their companies were doing a great job hiring for diversity because they see multiple ethnicities in the hallways at work. Still others felt that everyone at their company was treated equally, so diversity and inclusion efforts were alternately either extremely effective or completely unnecessary. I'm not sure exactly how someone who is not a minority in the tech space could fairly evaluate a question about how minorities are treated within the industry, and yet here we are. The survey is instructive for a variety of different reasons, but for our purposes, it's important to ask this question. Given what we know about the diversity numbers in tech, if 94% of respondents gave their companies a passing grade, what exactly constitutes a passing grade? And what must failure look like? More importantly, who can we look to institute real change if we've convinced ourselves that things are fine even when they are not? So this question of who's in charge. To begin, figure I might as well define the term that I'm working within. In this context, purview represents the range or limit of authority, competence, responsibility, concern, or intention. D&I has been and continues to be an understandably frustrating space to inhabit. With billions of dollars invested in recruitment programs, internal training, pipeline development, retention efforts, to name but a few strategies that many of us are already well aware of, it would stand to reason that we'd be in a better place than we were 4 or 5 years ago. Having said this, it's also still pretty shocking that we are shocked that the needle hasn't moved very far, very fast. And I say this for a few reasons. We have now all bought into the idea that we've all bought into the idea, at least in part, that for any corporate initiative to be successful, be it D&I, compliance, product, or profit-based, it needs resources, and it needs support from the top. However, we also know that C-suite executives as a whole are not themselves a diverse group. They're not a representative group, and though there may be absolutely some empathetic feelings or basic appreciation for D&I as a potential to key future business development and competitive success, one could argue that there may also be a bit of tone deafness at the top that parallels the finding of the Atlassian survey, i.e., numbers are good, I see brown people in the hallway, my boss is a woman, things must be fine. CEOs may not have all the answers, but they do have the privilege of purview. And this is in part where we can locate, at least partially, a solution to recent D&I failures reported in the news. What I'm suggesting here is that a company CEO is a leader, and what is important to that leader becomes important to everyone in that organization. And that includes everything from D&I to compliance to ethics. The privilege of purview is not a racialized privilege. It's a privilege of position, a privilege of defining priorities, a privilege of setting the true bearing of the organization. The person who possesses the privilege of purview may absolutely be informed by their relative position of power, their racialized and gendered identity, their life experiences, and their biases, but at the end of the day, their purview is such that they are fundamentally responsible for speaking to not only what they want when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but also what the consequences would actually be if these goals were not met. And this is a lot of responsibility, absolutely, but tone from the top, a notion that is common in ethic and compliance circles, is also about empowering leaders within an organization to work as surrogates of the CEO's expressed expectations. To fund D&I initiatives and not otherwise support it through reward programs, accountability, measurement, reporting, training, real goals, and real consequences is to doom it to failure. If leadership does not take it seriously, neither will the organization. In conversations with a number of diversity and inclusion professionals, I have heard time and again that they build the D&I roles, they build the D&I departments, but key leaders and key stakeholders are not particularly convinced of either the value of diversity and or inclusion, and are not entirely convinced that they haven't already done a good job. Building in a D&I officer or director, but not giving them authority to inform hiring processes, recruitment strategies, or retention programs is to establish a position that is incapacitated by virtue of its limited purview. These efforts cannot come from below. So diversity and ethics and culture and change, where do diets come in? Okay, we all know what a diet is. It is a program, maybe a product that involves either caloric or food-specific restrictions that are often short-term in nature, promising fast and lasting results. I've tried a few in my life. I'm assuming some people within earshot have tried some in theirs. Now, despite the public and private failure of most diets, the diet industry remains a multi-billion-dollar industry. Diets promise low-effort, extreme results that often end up requiring a rather high level of discomforting effort with either minimal and short-term results or drastic and unsustainable results. By now, most of us have also heard the term lifestyle change and how it has redefined the health and wellness space. Quite the opposite of a weight loss panacea, the lifestyle change, as the name suggests, is not a 30-day fix, a patch, or a shake. The lifestyle change is all about small cumulative changes in daily habits over the course of a lifetime that are designed to be sustainable over time. The focus is less on short-term weight loss and more on long-term health. So what does this have to do with D&I? I am suggesting that we have been focused on short-term fixes, expecting lasting results, when in fact we need to be thinking about diversity and inclusion as a lifestyle change, something that requires ongoing attentiveness and dedication, else face failure. So I have several examples to illustrate this point. The Rooney Rule, instituted in 2003, was an NFL policy that was created to increase diversity within the league's coaching ranks. It required teams to interview, but not necessarily hire, at least one minority for head coaching and later general management positions. In the short term, it was successful. Prior to its implementation, minority coaches made up 5% of the head coaching staff. Post-implementation, between about 2003 and 2011, the number jumped to 22%. Now, was the success sustainable? Well, actually, we don't know. The percentages have fallen since 2012, and today sits around 14%. The Detroit Lions were the first team to be fined under the Rooney Rule. Long story short, they needed a coach. They had one in mind. He was not a minority. They made some calls to black coaches to fulfill their obligation to the rule. None of the black coaches wanted to take the call because they knew that they already had selected their preferred choice. So they refused to be interviewed, and the Lions weren't able to fulfill their obligation. And given their lack of options, they hired the coach they wanted and were subsequently fined $200,000. Now, there are many debates, really just scratching the surface here. There are many debates and other challenges with this rule and its implementation that I can't address today, but it's important to underscore how the application of the rule has devolved. For those who have followed its trajectory, we do know that certain black coaches have become the go-to phone call to fulfill the Rooney Rule mandate, which speaks to pipeline issues, pedigree expectations, and the need to develop a much deeper pool of potential candidates. There is also a case of a stand-in candidate, a former football player and coach, who agreed to be the Rooney Rule interviewee for a small fee of $100,000 an interview. From the perspective of those watching from the sidelines, the combination of a lack of Rooney Rule fines being handed out and the drop in number of minority coaches of late, it looks as though the NFL has been phoning it in. As one particular source summarized, these half measures are evidence of an unwillingness to, quote, and I quote, follow the letter of the law while violating the spirit of the rule by never seriously considering a candidate for the job. But let us be clear, the rule is not flawed, the spirit is. The Rooney Rule is a diet measure that could have actually become a lifestyle change had the NFL been committed to real and lasting change. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, Pinterest diversity and inclusion efforts are a stellar example of what commitment to diversity looks like in action, complete with full disclosures of shortcomings and speaking candidly about areas of improvement. Though they were not as successful out of the gate as they'd hoped, they were transparent about redoubling their efforts to continue to focus on real and measurable change and real accountability. They too have used the Rooney Rule as a starting point, however. They implemented the Rooney Rule, but expanded its scope to include interviewing at least one female candidate and one candidate from an underrepresented group for every open leadership position. When reevaluating their implementation of the Rooney Rule, Pinterest again expanded their efforts. In 2017, they've broadened the scope of the rule to include interviewing women and minorities for all top-level managerial positions and executive roles. Their laser focus on pay equity and their commitment to public accountability exemplify how we can take a simple process adaptation like the Rooney Rule and turn it into a standard operating procedure designed for ongoing and sustainable change. So now this next section on business case and moral case for diversity and inclusion was one that had originally started out, being fairly philosophical, even by my own admission. And the more I, reviewed the literature and reviewed my research, I settled on a unexpected conclusion that, is the business case greater than or equal to the moral case? I'm going to say, as long as you care about both, it really doesn't matter. If you're approaching diversity and inclusion from a relative position of your organizational values that are informed by compassion and doing good work well, you are honoring the initiative and the spirit of the initiative. A superficial appreciation for the benefits of a diverse workforce or a limited focus on public perception combined with an unsophisticated approach to managing differences via similarities and shared values will not produce results. You do not have to worry about this utilitarian view of leveraging people if you are actually earnest and interested in leveraging diverse skills to unleash unique abilities and harness the legitimate value of culturally specific perspectives. At the end of the day, the commitment of your workforce is an extension of your sincere commitment to them, and at least in the diversity and inclusion space, it will not work the other way around. When it comes to ethical decision-making and diversity, we are increasingly moving towards more collaborative and open work environments. Teamwork requires more and more consensus building. We know from implicit bias research that the slower we process information, the better we are at avoiding instant, lasting, and questionable decisions and assessments. An absolute value of diverse groups is that it is difficult to tap into other means is that they offer a kind of a speed bump by slowing down consensus because the need to clearly communicate differently to different individuals who represent different cultures and who are informed by a variety of different lived experiences. If sameness begets sameness, consensus is easy, but will often go unchallenged. In a diverse space where all members are empowered to participate fully, and that's an important point that I'll come back to later, consensus becomes more challenging. However, once consensus is achieved in this mixed group, it has profited from a significant filtering effect, having passed through a number of different perspectives. Research has shown that heterogeneous groups are actually able to transmit and transfer more information, which can result in vastly new ideas and result in more ethical actions and outcomes. One study in particular found that the odds of a diverse group making ethical decisions is 3 times that of a homogeneous group. It is important to remember that harnessing these special benefits can only be possible in a truly inclusive space, which can only be achieved by teaching the necessary skills and sharing the values and expectations of your organization. Establishing the rules of engagement is an essential part of actually unleashing these benefits. So how exactly do we do this? So diversity return on investment. We've been told that diverse teams make us more innovative and adaptable and more ethical. I would argue that understanding why this is true is as important as determining how this is true. I want to briefly touch on 2 studies that highlight not only how diversity can actually be harnessed, but speak to how diversity actually contributes to creativity and better decision-making. These studies are also important, and I do want to underscore this, because they tell us that these benefits are not inherent. They require stewardship and support in order to succeed. So when it comes to political correctness, this is one of those terms you either hate for a variety of reasons or are firmly in favor of for a variety of reasons. A working definition for our current purposes, political correctness is the conscious avoidance of speech and action that exclude or insult socially marginalized groups. This term is also often used as a criticism by those who perceive the practice of PC culture to be overbearing or stifling. In other words, we don't always think that political correctness is a good thing. So what does political correctness have to do with diversity and creativity? In a 2015 study about the effectiveness of mixed-sex groups, they found that political correctness actually increased creativity. So how does that work? We often think that when it comes to brainstorming, the freer the conversation, the better. If people can say what's on their mind without encumbrances, the creative juices will flow. In reality, the uncertainty about offending people who are different than us ends up actually muffling creativity, which can have a dulling effect on mixed group interactions. Fear of rejection in these groups can be silencing. The study found that men's uncertainty was largely related to the fear of seeming overbearing or sexist, and women's uncertainty was related to a fear of seeming incompetent or meek. And quote from the study, "Uncertainty over how and when to adhere to the norm to avoid sexism may cause men and women to overcorrect in ways that inhibit the expression of creative ideas." So now, once a PC norm was imposed on the mixed-sex group, so for example, no derogatory language, no interruptions, no sexist behavior, and providing clear consequences for failing to meet these expectations, the uncertainty that may have existed in the group before was lifted, and the participants felt freer to express themselves. Now, in this new PC norm space, the mixed-sex group outperformed when it came to idea generation, the sheer number of ideas that they could generate, and idea novelty, which was the actual originality of these ideas. With the rules in place, mixed-sex group performed as well as same-sex groups, which just happened to be a rather surprising finding in the study. What I want to underscore here, within the context of your culture, your business needs, building an ethical workplace that seeks to benefit from diversity and inclusion, is that the study suggests that it is not enough to get your numbers up. Mixed-sex groups can and do generate more innovative and creative ideas, but not by default. Giving a mixed-sex team the tools and the rules of engagement and setting the expectations for respect and civility free up any in-group or out-group discomfort so they could focus on the real work of collaboration. And this actually takes work. So what does doing good in this particular space look like? Well, increasing the number of women and minorities on your team. But how do you do this good thing well? Doing it well obligates us to learn more about what to do with those numbers once we have them. We know that social interaction with difference makes us better at social interaction with difference. Your ethics programs and your corporate training initiatives remain a key property of both building and informing your team's cultural and gender competencies in the workplace. We need to highlight similarities in that we all share the desire to be included, heard, and respected, but we need to also solve for new contexts in order to actually unleash the benefits of difference. So, cognitive laziness, job performance, and bias. I'm going to slow down because I have a little story for you, and all the names have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. So, a Black woman walks into a senior care facility. We're going to call her Mary. And a white nurse, we'll call her Samantha, approaches Mary with a happy, helpful exuberance. Samantha says, "Hi, how are you doing today? Are you here to see Evelyn?" Now, Mary was not there to see Evelyn. She was actually there to visit her brother-in-law, but she did happen to know Evelyn because they grew up in the same church. Mary decides, why not, and makes the unplanned detour to say hello to an old friend. It wasn't until later, when recounting this interaction with her sister, that Mary realized that the only reason Samantha asked her if she was there to see Evelyn was that Evelyn was also happened to be Black. This is a real example, and it is also a great example of cognitive laziness. It is also known in implicit bias discourses as heuristics, or, more crudely, problem solving through practical shortcutting. Samantha's reasoning skills narrowed a single trait, skin color, to a single category, relationship. If a Black person comes to visit a patient, it's likely that they're going to be visiting a Black patient. Why am I telling this story as an example of doing good versus doing a good thing well? Well, Samantha was actually trying to do a good job. She approached her visitor in a welcoming manner. She wanted to be helpful. Unfortunately, her cognitive shortcut made her look bigoted, even if she, in her heart of hearts, is not a bigot. If Mary didn't know Evelyn, Mary could have very easily complained to Samantha's supervisor about a racist nurse. That Mary did happen to know Evelyn, ironically, confirms Samantha's bias and sets her up for a future misjudgment. Now, diversity training could have helped Samantha refine her judgment by making her aware of the fact that we are all informed by these cognitive shortcuts, but we must all be very conscientious when it comes to how we apply them and how they can fool us into narrow-mindedness. Knowing what we know about implicit biases, heuristics, and all of the extremely useful shortcuts we make every moment of every day, Samantha would have been able to learn that her assumptions in this particular circumstance, though well-meaning, are problematic and frankly unnecessary. By treating every individual who entered the senior care facility in the same way, "Hi, how are you? How can I help you?" she would have been empowered to do a good job better. Now, as an aside, it makes sense to mention that heuristics also, tell us who gets followed in a department store, who looks like they can afford a $660 Gucci belt, and who looks like the team leader. Science tells us that we're trained to see these patterns, and we love to apply the patterns to shortcut the effort it takes to think. We have pretty lazy brains by default. Efficient, but lazy, and often inaccurate. And when it comes to diversity and inclusion, they can also further inform prejudices and biases. So why should you and your organization care about cognitive laziness? Because it stifles creative thinking. It destroys creative problem solving. If left unchecked and unchallenged, it oversimplifies the world and underprepares us for change. It can also lead us into very murky ethical waters if we are only informed by those things that confirm our pre-existing biases. Diversity, inclusion, and diversity training in particular not only helps us work on our awarenesses, it disrupts our assumptions about each other and our differences. In homogeneous spaces, cognitive laziness can take over. In mixed spaces, our assumptions are constantly being challenged by new information, new logics, new perspectives, and this can result in greater creativity because we are relying less on these shortcuts. And we're focusing more on creating sophisticated connections between what we knew, what we know, and what we've just learned. New people with new perspectives can also be viewed as a preventative against bad choices. The destructive power of groupthink cannot be overstated here. When people of like mind verge on hive mind, bad ideas and/or unethical choices and behaviors are free to lay waste to your company's reputation. One of the most important benefits of a diverse team is that it challenges our worldview on an ongoing basis and acts as a safeguard against the danger of thought conformity. By disrupting our lazy minds, which is also a trait that we all share, we are actually expanding our ability to not only do good things, but do those good things well. So by way of conclusion, I just want to cover some best practices and summarize some of the main points that I've mentioned here and really underscore things as we move into a discussion about ethics. Diversity will simply not help your business if it's not maximized, and it can only be maximized if there's a commitment to understanding the needs of a diverse and inclusive workforce. Diversity programs will fail if they're not built upon a solid foundation that holds at its very core an authentic commitment, not just to diversity, but also to a belief that meaningful change is actually possible. Meaningful change is hard work, and it requires an investment in learning more about the people who we want to engage and learning more about where we are and where we want to go. This is not euphemistic. We use the term training itself as a heuristic and tend to forget that good training has to be educated. We must go out of our way to understand how to work with and within the spirit of our values. When nurtured and afforded adequate training and practice, a diverse workforce is a nimble and creative workforce that, by virtue of its varied and distinct makeup, represents a significant check on ingrained biases, poor, and potentially unethical decisions. A diverse workplace that is committed to inclusion and active engagement can create a more ethical workplace by disrupting potentially misguided assumptions and lazy logics. A commitment to your organizational values can work to reinforce an ethical culture that clears a path whereby you are better able to shift from short-term, numbers-only measures to lasting diversity and inclusion lifestyle changes. And now we have our first poll question.
Right. So for those of you who are listening and are not eating your sandwich right now, we have a question for you. We're curious to see what the feedback on the field is on some of these topics. So we would like to know, when it comes to building an inclusive workplace, what would you say is your organization's biggest challenge? Is it defining it? Is it measuring it? Getting buy-in from above? getting buy-in from below, or establishing best practices. And so I'm going to launch the poll right away now, and then you're going to get a chance to answer these very questions. So it's going to come up on your screen in just a second. There it is. So when it comes to building an inclusive workplace, what would you say is your organization's biggest challenge? I see people are voting. Numbers are going up pretty fast. We're almost at 50% already. Let's see if we can get this to 70. Thank you, by the way, very much for putting your answers in. We love to collect this data, and then in just a few minutes we'll look at the results, because I think it offers an interesting insight into what the perception is out there. We're now at 70%, so I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds for those of you who still wish to put their vote in. I'm going to close it. And so here are the results. Any comments from Douglas and Carmen?
It's a pretty mixed bag. I'm surprised, but establishing best practices seems to win out, and great for me as a lead instructional writer, as a needs assessment, definitely, but my one top of mind comment would be that that's something that should be curated across teams to figure out what those needs are from below and above, and try and triangulate what those best practices would be from a needs-based assessment. But that's really interesting, defining it and measuring it almost neck and neck there.
Great. And so I'm going to hide the results now, and Douglas, we're going to carry on with the presentation.
Yep, sorry about that. Hi, folks. I'm here to talk about what we know about ethics and compliance as a bridge to highlight Carmen's really great insights about diversity. So first, let's define what we're talking about when we talk about ethics. Today, when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about correct behavior defined by a company's values. So your values as a company are the higher moral standard that governs employees' behaviors. This is ethical. Why do we care about ethics in general? Let's look at the news. So being a lawyer who follows compliance and ethics thought leadership, I feel like I hear every day about a company's illegal activity per SEC and DOJ enforcement actions, lawsuits, or case resolutions. And what's still shocking to me is that sophisticated companies that we all know about that nonetheless have codes of conduct, sexual harassment policies, ethics programs, and company values are being busted for doing unethical things that contradict what they say they're going to do. A gap forms between what an organization communicates and what we actually do. And here's the truth, folks. No longer are companies able to recover from unethical actions like they did before. Time and time again, we are seeing public companies being held accountable, not just to shareholders and employees like they always have been, but now to society. And when they aren't accountable, and if they are caught, their profits, their market share, and their employees, and most importantly, their brand, suffer as a result of not being committed to not just their values, but ethical values. Paper programs are the problem from a compliance perspective. So compliance programs that exist primarily on paper and not in practice are known as paper programs, and they are increasingly dangerous to ethics. I often cite David Hess, his article, because his considerations are based on both survey data and empirical evidence. His insights about compliance are shockingly similar to what Carmen talked about today, and I quote, "A so-called paper program is not necessarily a bad faith attempt at intentional window dressing, but may be a program that is misaligned with the company's culture and has lost legitimacy. This model shows that a corporation, even when acting in good faith, that adopts the technical aspects of a compliance program, but does not attend to the organization's informal systems and ethical climate, will not be successful in encouraging ethical behavior." The danger from this is that we are lulled into thinking we've done everything we can, and we certainly want to do good, but we just don't have the means to progress further. We're not saying it's intentional, it's just not thought out enough. There's not enough commitment from companies. And does this sound familiar? This is similar to the problem of diversity that Carmen talked about. Time and time again, we are shown that we are not doing what we need to do. Look at the diversity numbers, right? Look at the number of lawsuits out there. This isn't me or Carmen talking. This is what empirical evidence shows. An insufficient tone at the top is when an executive and top senior management waffles about whether they really care about ethics and diversity. Their waffling sets that tone. This has led the DOJ in their recent enforcement guidance to describe how to evaluate this tone at the top. This supplements Carmen's insights about how critical it is to have CEOs and leaders be truly committed to higher values, particularly diversity and inclusion. And so I'm going to release some of the statements that the DOJ evaluates, and so to draw takeaways in diversity. They ask, how have senior leaders through their words or actions encouraged or discouraged misconduct? What concrete actions have they taken to demonstrate leadership in the company's compliance and remediation efforts? How does the company monitor its senior leadership's behavior? And finally, how has senior leadership modeled proper behavior to subordinates? Tone at the top is directly related to culture. A good culture is dependent on the views of leadership and also on legitimacy, where employees big and small believe in what you say as a company, they think it's fair, and it matches what they personally believe in too. Management needs to exemplify values through their actions and words. This is absolutely critical. Informal systems like water cooler talk and seeing peers violate company policy without recourse also influence culture. They make it worse. Paper compliance programs have failing cultures. And then finally, lack of benchmarking. Like diversity, it's hard to quantify the real stuff, the real change. And we're not talking about numbers here. We're talking about changing behavior and attitudes in the workplace. How do you quantify that? Is a problem we're all seeing in ethics and diversity. The solution. Values drive everything. Your company has values, EverFi has values. They define what behavior is correct and what is incorrect. The law does this to some extent, but as we all know, it's not enough, right? Companies still manage to violate laws when they well know them to exist. Values are your indestructible anchors that drive not only company aspirations, but strategy and products and recruitment and retention and compliance and how employees treat each other in the workplace on a very low level. Does the company live up to its values? If not, you're going to fail because no one, the public, employees, and regulators are going to believe you. It may seem self-aggrandizing, but I've quoted one of my colleagues, Karen Peterson. She scoured academic research and expert guidance and cited it to describe what we need to do as companies. We're releasing it soon, so look out for it, but I'm going to quote her now. And she says, while avoiding legal sanctions is important, and this is good for the attorneys on the call, creating a work environment that values ethical behavior turns words on paper into effective company-wide practices. So the process for establishing and maintaining a strong value system is guided by the organization's mission and vision for its future, and mapping out a business plan that reaches its goals without sacrificing its integrity. Crafting the solution on how. And I realize, folks, that we're going to go a little bit over. Please stick with us for maybe another 5 minutes past the 45-minute mark, as Carmen's going to produce the real big takeaways that you can take away from this webinar. So I really appreciate it, and I am very much looking forward to hearing what she has to say. Crafting the solution. So I'm going to go over this quickly. I want to provide you some ways to help develop culture and develop values in your company. And these are things you can do right now. So first is data. Everyone is using data nowadays. And one I find helpful are climate surveys. So surveys are great because employees like being asked questions, they like being listened to, and the results are something tangible that you can work with, benchmark, and show senior management about the progress you're making as an individual. They're also the subject of the vast majority of academic and social science articles out there. So in fact, you're creating your own study in the workplace. So for an example on how Google used the climate survey to improve its employees' relationships with management, I linked the Harvard Business Review article that found Google's initiative, which involved the climate survey, was very successful in achieving that. And then finally, Ethisphere has released its initial insights. It lists companies that are ethical. In that insights, it lists actually how they quantify culture and behavior. And I think it's really great to have those data points as you evaluate your own program. And then finally, culture. So culture is going to close the gap between company values and employee actions. The inputs that go into employees' decision, whether they're entry level or executive, are influenced by culture. And so a lot of the things I talked about earlier about having management set a good tone and a tone at the top from senior leadership and having legitimacy, having legitimate, fair policies and practices all contribute to culture. And these are necessary because good culture makes good decisions and bad cultures make bad decisions. Diversity helps build a better culture, as Carmen has indicated, because the more people are different, the better inputs that go into ethical decision making. Training is necessary, but insufficient by itself. And Carmen made clear the benefits of training and how it can impact the workplace, particularly from a diversity and inclusion perspective. Oh, I think we have a poll question. Michele?
Yes, this is going to be our last poll question for today. We knew that this was going to be a dense presentation, so we kept it to 2 poll questions. How does your organization most communicate its values? Policies, everyday actions, senior leadership, training, or employees? So I'm just going to launch this very quickly. I know we're coming up on time, but hopefully you're finding this. And I see from the number of you that are still on that you are appreciating and enjoying the presentation, and many people are voting. We're reaching 50%. I'd like to get it to 70 so that both you and us can have a few interesting points of reference here. So couple seconds more. We're almost there at 65. I'm looking at the presenters. I know they still have things to say, so I'm going to close out the poll and share the results with all of you. So any comments?
I am completely heartened by these results. So the fact that everyday actions is the most common way to communicate values is picture perfect target. That's where you need to be. So it's not just policies or reading something you click through on a screen. It's every day that you are espousing companies' values and you believe in them. And so fantastic. Second, policies, which is great too. Those are really senior leadership's indications that yes, we care about X, Y, and Z. The thing about policies, of course, is you really need to take those and really translate it into behavior and action, and training can do that, as Carmen has indicated. So thank you, folks. I really appreciate that. Thank you for letting me know. Awesome.
So I'm going to close this out, and then we'll have just another couple of slides, and then we'll bring this to a close.
Yeah, folks. Probably about 2 more minutes, and thank you again for sticking on. I really appreciate it because we thought hard about this. And the last thought I want to do, and the last thing I'll say is thinking about millennials, thinking about the future. They're key to a lot of what we've talked about today. So they are your consumers, they're your employees, and they're your managers. And by 2025, millennials will account for 75% of the workforce. So in less than 10 years, millennials will be everywhere. And yet many companies are not planning for this future by incorporating ethics and diversity right now. Deloitte released a global survey of millennials, and I actually find it quite compelling. And you need to know I'm a pretty big skeptic by heart. And you just need to ask my mom, Pam Kelly, who is currently on a bowling tournament, to know that. I drive her crazy. But let's go over what the research says. So you got to remember that millennials, and I am one, have grown up with the consumer excess of the 90s, the technology boom of the 2000s, and social consciousness of the 2010s, what we're experiencing now. We're watching the fall of America, and we want to believe that there's something good about our existence. We want to believe that there's something more. Millennials want values that go beyond profits, and they want those values to match their values. Research shows that they want ethics and they want diversity. And we're not just talking about race and gender, which are critically important. We're talking about being individuals in the workplace and being supported for being different yet effective as we live out the values we want to believe in at our companies. That is diversity and that is ethics. And companies, I believe, need to act now because it's going to take time and energy. So with that, we have takeaways, and I'm going to kick it off to Carmen.
Thanks, Douglas. That was great. This is really takeaways by way of concluding, and thank you all again for sticking it out with us. Yeah, high-level takeaways. The diverse workplace can and does disrupt unethical decision-making. Diversity should be an ethical value, as Douglas has spoken to just now. You also must commit to diversity and ethics to reap their benefits. It's not something that you can just create and hope that it's going to be automated and run on its own. You have to drive it through education and training and support, and as you've indicated, everyday actions and tone from the top. Also, inclusion, true inclusion, requires skill building in order to actually support a more ethical, truly ethical workplace.
Great. So thank you very much, Carmen and Douglas. This has been a great presentation. When we put in this together, I could sense and feel your passion. And again, we're sorry, folks, if now we're just like 6 minutes late, but it was hard to contain the enthusiasm and the creativity of these two folks here today. And these are really topics that they care about in a very extreme way. So thanks for those of you who are still here. We still have 160 people on. So thank you for being engaged. I'm just going to quickly bring us to a close, thanking our presenters again for their great presentation, and letting all our attendees know that I'm still getting a couple questions. Yes, the slides will be sent to you along with the full recording. The resources that our presenters have been referencing will be clickable on the copy that you receive. So, and that's yours to keep for future reference. I also want to remind everybody that EverFi, that's hosting this webinar today, provides a comprehensive training platform for corporate compliance, where we, as you've heard from our instructional designer, lead instructional designer, and lead legal editor, we have these wonderful professionals and resources that help us craft the courses and the learning paths in the most up-to-date and engaging way. So if you're curious and you're not familiar with the courses and you would like to receive a demo, now's the time to just type demo at the right-hand side of your screen. That will signal to us that you're interested. A training expert will reach out and will show you around, give you a tour of our solution. Again, that's demo on the right-hand side of your screen when you've been typing your questions. We do receive that indication from you, and we'll make sure to reach out. We've had a number of questions, but we're not going to have time to address them. Douglas and Carmen will be in touch. To those of you who have put them there, once again, thank you for your participation, not only attending, but also, again, we love when our attendees ask questions on the webinars. So one last thing before we part, this has been mentioned before, but I just want to say it again. Close this out now soon when the presentation will be over, and a quick survey will initiate. It's about the quality of the webinar. We just want to know what you thought about this event today and the topic. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to complete. It's obviously non-mandatory, but we do value your feedback greatly. So if you can take those 2 or 3 minutes to fill it in, we will then closely look at your answers and take that into account for planning future events. We have now been, we're almost at the top of the hour here. I'd say the presentation is over. Thanks very much to everybody who participated. Thanks to our presenters. And please stay tuned, because we will run more of these in the future in the domain of corporate compliance. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.